what I got wrong in the past, pushing experimentation for the sake of it, rather than trying to make people understand how it benefits them.
What is going on, certified homies? Welcome to another episode of From A to B. You have Shiva. I'm joined by Gerda the Koala, Vogt-Thomas, whose name I totally didn't butcher. She is a co-owner at Koalatative, which is a clever pun on qualitative that I definitely also didn't just learn for the first time 10 minutes ago. And she was also a speaker at Women in Experimentation. Gerda, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
The reason why I wanted to have you on was you are a co-owner at Koalatative. Something that I think is quite interesting is exploring the dichotomy between politics, and that's not a dichotomy, just exploring the idea of politics in CRO. I wanted to have you on, maybe as a little bit of like a challenge to figure out, is it easier or harder to politic when it's in-house versus agency? And what are best ways to politic, even though maybe we shouldn't be focused on it? And when I say politic, I mean pretty clearly like, how do you get people to do what you want them to do in the nicest way possible?
I was just going to say that maybe we should like super clearly define what do we mean by politics, right? For me, it's kind of like the combination of bureaucracy and personal relationships, right? At the end of the day, if you have an organization that already has, 10 or more people, there's going to be some level of bureaucracy, right? Like you have to have these standards or rules in place because you can't have anyone doing whatever.
So bureaucracy is a very apt way of putting it. I think it's like there's layers of approvals. I'm sure CROs are no stranger to, well, I want to run this test, but someone somewhere is blocking me from running this test. So that is what I mean by politicking. But just so we get an idea of exactly who Gerda is, do you want to walk me through kind of your experience starting it in-house, going to agency, and then being like, I'm going to start my own agency?
Yeah, I'm thinking how far back of the origin story should we go?
So you were birthed on the birthday of, no.
So I studied actually business and marketing in university. And as part of that bachelor's program, we were required to do an internship in the real world. And I got this amazing opportunity to go into one of the largest telecom companies in Estonia. They, at the time at least, worked with a lot of agency partners. And as a part of that internship, I just got to go to those agencies and talk to their PMs and see how things work in the real world, so to say. I think at that time, I already knew that I'm going to end up in an agency setting one way or another. But then it took like still several years to actually get into CRO. My first sort of real job out of university was in sales actually, but also for an agency that sold recruitment services. And it was a great first job because I really quickly got like the lay of the land of how the job market works and what type of skills and people companies are looking for. And again, my feeling was confirmed that digital marketing is where it's at.
I talked to like 6 different CROs and they've all started in sales. And there's the SEO guy I talked to a couple weeks ago. He also started in sales. Maybe there's some parallels, right? You're like, maybe there's some connections there to politicking, right? For sales, you're learning how to sell a product to an individual. When you're in CRO, your sales job is selling CRO internally, right?
Totally. But it's like, it's night and day from that experience. Like, when I started, there was a lot of like cold outreach, like actually calling leads and stuff. And it's completely different from how we operate in this moment. Like we don't do any cold outreach. Everything is through networking and content. And that really suits my personality a lot better. Like just talking about organically what you're doing and kind of showing people who you are rather than being super salesy, I guess. Like,
yeah.
There are people that obviously thrive in that sort of position as well. It just wasn't for me. Like I much prefer the organic sort of content creation and selling through education and that kind of stuff.
Well, I think your story is more sexier than failed doctor who was like, I need to do something else. That was me. I'm the failed doctor.
You're a failed doctor?
Don't ask me to do anything medical. It's not a good thing. Yeah.
Like you actually finished medical school?
No, I failed at being a doctor.
Oh, I see.
No,
Well,
that'd be bad, right? Like a failed doctor. I like killed someone on a surgery and no longer a doctor.
yeah, I was afraid to ask.
Yeah. No, don't worry. No one has died at the hands of my hands yet.
Do you feel like talking about it?
No, definitely not.
Oh,
My
okay.
lawyer advised me not to. Moving on. So I know you were working as a salesperson and now you spent some time at CXL Spiro on the agency side. How did you transition into becoming the co-founder of Koalatative?
Yeah, we kind of chatted about it a little bit earlier, how the burnout and everything plays into it. But yeah, I just kind of realized that I was just on for 15 years or so without ever taking a break between, finishing school and working all the time. And then the whole 2020 happened. And
Wait, what happened then? Did something happen? I might have missed it.
Yeah, don't want to talk about that. Lots happened. Yeah, I was going through a lot of change in my personal life and just realizing that I'm extremely burnt out. And at the time, I didn't realize that it was just the whole, 15 years of doing stuff without a break because, that's how our society is built, that you just go from one position to the next. You finish school, you start working, and then eventually you get sick, sort of, and then your body...
And then you die.
Yeah, and I saw that so much around me in my own sort of circle of people, and I just started freaking out or having some sort of identity crisis that, oh my God, I don't want to be that person. I want something different. I want the freedom to choose how I build my schedule. I want the freedom to choose where I live and all that kind of stuff. My original plan was to just take a full-on break for months and then figure out what to do. And maybe, start doing some content or something like that to just have a creative outlet and to build some, personal brand or whatever. And of course, life had other plans. Opportunity dropped into my lap to go in-house for the first time in CRO. And it was an amazing opportunity. And because of a lot of circumstances at the time, I just decided that I need to take it. Otherwise, I'm going to regret it. And it was an amazing experience, even though I only spent 6 months there and then ended up moving on again.
We both share that. We were both ex-Spiro folks, and they didn't pay me to say this, but Spiro is definitely a group of certified homies for anyone who wants to work with them.
Yeah, I think when they hired me to work there in that junior position, I hadn't even heard about CRO at that point. That's where I learned. It was an amazing experience, obviously. It was there for 3 years. So, yeah.
That leads us to the crux of the conversation around politicking. And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on specifically was exploring the idea of perhaps politicking being, in my opinion, which I'm sure you'll disagree with, but in my opinion, the politicking actually being much harder when you're agency side or an individual, fractional person compared to being in-house. So that's the position I take. I have preferred to be in-house because having conversations with people, being part of QBRs, being able to if you're dealing with a problematic coworker, to just be let's wrap, let's go grab a coffee or something. I think those are things that I see as incredibly valuable to help in the politicking space and actually getting perspectives on maybe where to push and pull. I prefer that for in-house. That I think sometimes it can be much harder on agency side, but I'm guessing you disagree with that stance.
Give your favorite answer. It depends, right? It depends on the size of the agency a lot, I think. Because if you're a junior person in a very large agency, yeah, it might be really tough for you to make any progress with politics or whatever. I think that if you're an in-house employee, you're way more emotionally invested in that politics game because you're not just gonna, quit and find another job. It's if you don't like some small thing or whatever, it's a big deal to switch a full-time job. When you're an agency, a small one, an agile one, and you go into that arrangement with the client with the expectation that we're doing this on a month-to-month basis, both parties have the opportunity to cancel within 30 days for whatever reason. That's at least how we do things. We never want the client to feel like they're locked into some thing where they're not getting value or whatever. I have this emotional detachment from the politics. And even though we still have to make decisions diplomatically and involve all the parties and whatever, I don't get emotionally caught up in it anymore, as I perhaps in the past have done. And it can be beneficial to the client as well, because they can be more honest in a way with an external partner. And then we've had like lots of experiences where that weekly meeting almost becomes like a counseling session where they can sort of vent and like get that outside neutral perspective of how to navigate that internal turmoil, because they don't have that outlet internally, perhaps.
So it's interesting. You bring up a good point. Obviously, the "it depends" is the answer, and we could just end the podcast. The reality is it does depend on a lot of things. You brought up a good point around, do you have that internal stakeholder who is maybe the CRO manager or maybe a product owner who also oversees CRO, and they're like, I don't have the resources, agency, come in and help me figure this out. That requires buy-in from key stakeholders. So I guess buy-in and autonomy and responsibility to be able to do those things, right? Mm-hmm. If those circumstances exist where you're an agency and you're working with a partner or a team or maybe another agency that will give you all of that autonomy, then I think that relationship, like the politics, it's just conversations at that point. It's just having conversations with people saying, let's debate or discuss how we want to implement certain things. Here's the research, here's the data. But on the flip side, if you're an agency and you're working with a client, maybe you're working with that someone and all you're giving them is therapy sessions because they're like, I don't have any input to be able to affect any change. And maybe they had the budget to hire you to try and help, but at the end of the day, they keep on getting stonewalled.
Yeah, and that's also part of the whole like transparency and the approach that we take. Like if we see that, you know, we're blocked from every angle, we're not making progress, we always bring it up from our side, like, hey, we can go on pause, we can end this, come back later. We don't want to ever, you know, make you feel like you're not getting enough value out of it. So that's always also a really honest, upfront conversation. Like, again, not locking people into anything that they don't want to be in. And then, yeah, ultimately it's up to the client to determine what has enough value and what doesn't. Like, is it just purely the consultational part enough to kind of get them over the hump and try to sort of unblock things? Or do they need to go on pause? And like, every sort of outcome is fine. But again, I think there is this nice boundary in that situation where if you were an internal employee and you can't do your job because you're blocked, you would ultimately get fired, right? Like, there's not much to do.
So that does exist, right? I think the flip side is, in theory, if you were hired for a role of CRO, there were approvals of your role and responsibilities and your KPIs, and that's set in stone through the virtues of HR and your, you know, personal growth plan and whatever. If you can't do your job and you have clear evidence that you can't do your job because you're getting blocked all the time, then either your job will change or like you'll be let go. Or you'll reflect back and say, hey, by the way, I can't do my job here and I'm not going to get my bonus because everyone else is blocking me. Mm-hmm. So you look at that and you're like, all right, well, you might, and again, I don't keep on going back to it depends. As you move through this, you're probably like, well, at the end of the day, they did hire you to do a job. If you hired a plumber to do a job and you just kept on like keeping your door locked while your like basement's flooding, the plumber's going to be like, I'm just going to keep on collecting my paycheck while like you don't let me in the house. You're still going to pay me for the day's work, even though I'm not doing it. And maybe you just get paid and you don't have to politic. You just enjoy the time.
Yeah, I think it comes down to like the creativity part as well. It's like the creative problem solving and flexibility of finding other areas to work on if one is blocked.
Totally.
And I think, you know, most good CRO people share that trait of natural curiosity, of just always asking why things are the way they are. Why are we not doing something else? Let's experiment with that, right? So if we see that one area is completely blocked, we can research other areas and maybe bring value there or optimize something else.
Totally agreed. One thing I've always thought about is CROs have this tendency to be scrappy, right? So, and full disclosure, this is like you're a CRO joining a lower mid-maturity program. You're not like joining a booking.com that has like thousands of people dedicated on an experimentation team, right? You're in a low to mid-maturity program. In that case, I know Tracy always hated the word scrappy, but like it's true. Like we were always scrappy. Scrappy means just like you said, you're looking for ways to be helpful. I think that's actually a really good way of describing CRO as a function. It's just a help function for everyone else. At least I think so. In that way, I've always seen CRO as like, you're playing Jenga. You know Jenga? Mm-hmm. So apparently this is illegal in the rules of Jenga, but I've always played by this rule, which is I'll tap like certain bricks and the ones that are like, so that's illegal. Just PSA for y'all Jenga players. I've broken those rules. I play it by the Shiva rules. If you tap the bricks and you're like, you tap it and you're like, that's a structural brick. If I touch this whole thing will fall. Leave it alone.
That's like research, basically.
Exactly. But like internally, I think a lot of CROs, at least I've done this a lot. I'm curious if you've done this. You're metaphorically doing that, right? You're tapping a bunch of things to figure out what's the loose brick that if you tap it a little bit, you're like, it slides out. You're like, oh, all right, let me spend time here because I could actually take this brick out. Maybe it's the CRO jumping in and they're like, I want to run tests. All right, hippo exists. All right, well, that sucks. Can I get the hippo involved? No? Okay, that's a hard brick. Can I go into the qualitative data? Can I look at user reviews? Can I do this? And if that's the soft brick and you could slide that out, you're like, great, let me spend a ton of hours in this because I could actually deliver some value here. Have you felt like that?
Yeah, totally. I think the other word here is just the flexibility. Being able to be flexible, not get like emotionally attached again to some specific outcome that you thought is going to be the best for this business. And even though you may be right, you have to pick your battles because sometimes you're just blocked and it doesn't make sense to like sit and whine over it. You should like, as you said, poke those other blocks and see what else comes loose, right?
When you're working with certain stakeholders, you're presented a tower of bricks and you have to pull out one. Perhaps you're working with a hippo and you're trying to like, all right, I need to run tests and they're blocking you every step of the way. You're hitting all the rock hard structural Jenga bricks. You're trying different ways to position. You're not going to keep on tapping that same brick. You got to try different ways of attack. In that same way, it's like, all right, well, this is adjacent, right? Thinking about hippo thinking. But you show the qualitative data to the hippo and they're like, I don't give a fuck. You show them the test data, like, I don't give a fuck. But then maybe you just are like, all right, ignore the data. Talk to me about your problems. Like what are we trying to solve here? What's important to you? And then that's the soft brick. And then you can start to like pull that out and you continue to have conversations.
That is such a great point because like, again, the definition of politics, like in a lot of ways is personal relationships.
Totally.
And I think what I got wrong in the past and a lot of people still get wrong is the whole like pushing experimentation for the sake of it rather than trying to make people understand how it benefits them because they might perceive it as like, oh, these external or whatever new people are coming in and stirring stuff up and it's like going to make my life harder when in reality we want it to be the opposite, right? We want it to be helpful and good for everyone. And that's kind of what we forget about it, just the selling of like, what can this do for you, right?
I love this. And that's an issue, I think, with CROs living in an echo chamber that like, we know it's the most important thing in the world. At least a lot of us do, right? Like, so when you're talking with someone who doesn't believe it's the most important thing in the world, you could do like one of two things, right? One is, fuck you, you're an idiot. I'm right, you're wrong. Deal with it. Run my test. Or like, why don't you like this? Why don't you like me? What's wrong? What's going on here? That's the politic game.
And what you just said, why don't you like me, right? And the really bitter pill in business is that oftentimes it does come down to likability, not skill or education or whatever.
I thought you were going to say the opposite. I thought you were going to say at the end of the day, it's not you. It's their generalized. You're right. I think you're right. Sometimes reflect back and you might be too harsh, too challenging. You might be the problem that you're forcing something like you think about kids eat. I don't have kids, but like assume kids or let's say dogs. I have a dog who's very finicky sometimes. If he's like, I don't want to eat dinner today, I'm like, well, can I scoop a little bit of like beef onto your food and then you'll eat it? Can I coax you to like eat it? Same thing with babies, right? If you do like the airplane noise, then maybe they open their mouth. This is how we should treat stakeholders. All stakeholders are babies. Is that fair to say?
I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't take it that far. I think the more important perspective is that at the end of the day, everyone just has their own perspective and wants their life to be easier. And if they perceive you coming in and trying to make their life harder, they're going to block you in some way, right? Yeah. And the whole like likability aspect also, when you're perhaps a younger person trying to enter the market, at least I definitely perceived it that way, that it's all about the skill. I need to get this new certificate or do this course and then get more experience. But I completely or like almost neglected the part of like understanding how important the personal relationships are. And at the end of the day, if people like you, they want to work with you. If they don't like you, even if you have all those skills, they're not going to want to work with you. And it's unfair and terrible, but that's how it is.
I think that is the crux of the politicking game, right? Be someone who's likable. Be someone who people want to talk to you.
Yeah, totally.
That's probably adjacent to the helpfulness, right? If you're someone who they come to you and you are just helpful all the time, they'll want to come back to you more and they remember you and they like you and your name comes up in conversation. Wait, what does this guy do? He runs A/B tests? What the fuck is that? I don't know, but he's a good dude. Let's try and let's hear him out. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
what are some tips that what are some red flags that maybe you are a problem in the politicking game? Is it just like people don't want to talk to you or like people don't want to run your tests? Like what would be maybe reasons that your politics game, as the kids would say, not on fleek?
Yeah, I guess like the perception, if you feel that, everybody is against you and everybody's blocking you and you're the victim and it's everyone else's fault, then maybe it's time to think about like, okay, can I change my attitude about something and just chill out for a moment and kind of like try to approach it from a more human level rather than getting through our backlog and executing and, just working on those soft skills a little bit more and trying to get to know the person who you want something from, especially like what problems are they facing? What are they trying to solve? Can I help with that in some way or launch something that can be mutually beneficial?
And the flip side is you might not be able to help them all the time. And just be honest with them too. I had a conversation earlier with the coworkers today about running some A/B tests on some pages. And this coworker was like, I'd love to run an A/B test on this and learn more about this. And I'm like, I would too, but there's just not enough traffic. But like maybe we could do a qualitative survey or a winter survey, or maybe we could try some other things out. Or, it's funny, I had that same conversation with her and she was coming to me like, my issue right now is I am having trouble validating the things that I'm doing are genuinely providing value. I know they are. It's not a reflection of the hard work, but I'm just having a tough time quantitatively proving everything I'm doing is pushing the business in the right direction. And I'm like, only there was a tool that let you tested the things that you were doing. Oh wait, I have that tool. I'll do that for you. Right? And then her eyes lit up. She's like, wait, you can help. And then like immediately the guardrails drop and it's like, great. You could help me. And like the goal isn't to force that person to A/B test, right? That goal is to help them prove that the work that they're doing will help drive the business forward. Yeah, A/B testing is a mechanism to help them, but that's where we should be at using, I think the politics game, I think is just like, how do we help people achieve their goals? I guess maybe this is an adjacent point, but are we as CROs just glorified product owners?
Yeah, again, it depends on how your organization is built up and what is the sort of structure.
You said I was going to hate you because you'd say it depends a lot. You're right. You're right. You are right.
Like, what is the structure of your departments? What sort of resources do you have? What is the process of executing on things? All those things matter so much and they're all so different in every organization. And that's kind of what has taught me so much about the flexibility as well, this project-based work in so many organizations. Like I haven't had two projects that are like completely the same, right? Like sometimes the problems overlap or whatever, but they're so different because people are different and people perceive the value differently and people do things differently, communicate differently. And you have to be able to just be chill about it and be flexible and pick your battles, right?
If you at Koalatative, you're working with another company in its own quote unquote A/B test. If everything was the same, but you're dealing with product owner A, who's boisterous, very opinionated, has an MBA and thinks everything that they do never has to be tested, and then product owner B, right? Like you as a CRO have to understand that person, what makes them tick, how to work better with them to achieve the goals that you want, which is effectively Trojan horsing experimentation into that process.
And you were saying something about trust earlier too, which is totally valid because trust is earned, not given. Especially if you go in and like, why should people just hand over access to everything they've built? Like they don't know you. You have to earn that trust and show that you can bring some kind of results and actually help them, right? And how you're going to do that is you're going to have to make them like you. If they don't like you, you're going to not achieve anything.
100%. One last thing I wanted to explore with you is if you're a junior CRO and you were hired on a team, but you're struggling to get that politicking involved, perhaps you aren't the person to be speaking on the politics, right? If you're a junior trying to manage up, it could be tough. So instead, don't be afraid to ask for help within your company for a champion, or maybe looking agency side to see if maybe that could help you remove those blockers. Because while it sucks, sometimes people trust authority more than experience.
Yeah, I would say like an important factor with this is, again, the expectations set when you sell the project. Because if a client buys a project from a really high up director level important person, and then the work is sort of offloaded to junior people, it may be perceived as like they're being neglected or not getting their money's worth or whatever. It's better to be upfront about that. Like, it's not going to be me, this director person, executing on every single thing for you. I'm going to be there to oversee, but I have a full team that I fully trust and back that is going to be handling your stuff as well, right? Because for us, it's different. We right now don't really have junior employees. It's like just us 3 people on almost every project. When people buy it, they know that we're all personally involved. We're not going to offload it to anybody. Like, that's kind of like a really clear expectation that's been set. Imagine if we grow at some point or whatever, bring in more junior people, like I would dedicate a lot of upfront conversation around that. Like, hey, these are the people that will be working. I fully trust them. I oversee what they do, and like, they got this, you know? So you don't put those junior people in a position where they have to like argue with the client and sell themselves, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of my time at Spiro, that was always the case. Like, it wasn't the juniors or the analysts out there being put on the front lines to just like say everything. It was on that strategist to kind of manage a lot of those. Honestly, it was on the strategist to do a lot of that politicking in conjunction with the project manager. And the analysts got to do the fun work. They got to just do the work, right? We had to deal with people.
And it's hard to do any kind of politics if you don't get face time with the decision maker, right?
Yeah, that's why in-house is better. Checkmate.
No. That's the benefit of starting your own thing and choosing who you work with and really advocating for having that champion who internally who gets to, push things through and whatever. So you have more of a choice of who you work with, I guess. But yeah, it can be tough, especially if you're starting out as an agency. Like, you probably have to take opportunities from anywhere, right? And people leave companies all the time. And again, just be flexible, I guess.
To be fair, that's very true in-house as well. I mean, you could have your champion for CRO, and then if that person leaves, if you haven't embedded that as connective tissue across the company, like you could be back to square one and your whole program gets taken off. All right, Gerda, so what is it time for now?
Some for shit you need to know.
All right, let's go. Okie doke. Shit you need to know this week comes courtesy of a name that I will not pronounce properly. I am so sorry. Hristian Kambourov. I'm very sorry if I mispronounce your name. Anyone who is a follower of this podcast knows I suck with names. So
you should do a compilation of all the names you said.
I should absolutely not do a compilation with names, because that would be a terrible fucking podcast of me just butchering names. Well, maybe I should. That would be fun for some people. But I don't want anyone to be offended at my lack and inability to pronounce names. Anyway, so shit you need to know for this week comes courtesy of Hristian Kambourov again. So sorry if I mispronounced your name. So couple lines here, but I think this is pretty relevant to the topic that we covered here. So his post is, experimentation red flags number 1, stakeholders. And then he quotes, 13 is too many. And he's like, I've caught myself thinking this on a call a few times ago. Too many stakeholders, to be precise. That was basically his experience. He was working with a client who had 13 stakeholders. He was saying like 13 diverse agendas pulling in conflicting directions, 13 voices who would love to deliberate, 13 opinions to be expressed. So, huge red flag after 30 days. If you're looking at working with clients and you're like, damn, you have to copy like 15 people in this one test idea. That seems like a lot of people. And I think that's perhaps part of the politics game, because sometimes everyone wants to be involved, even though they don't have to be, but everyone like wants to feel like their input is valued. And I think that's adjacent to the politics game of like knowing when to involve people into processes so they're not left out, but not having so many freaking cooks in the kitchen that you literally don't get anything done.
Okay, so two things. Fully agree with the post. I think the only way to manage that scenario where for whatever reason you need to have 13 people on a call is to send an agenda beforehand and say that we're just going to go over this agenda and that's it. It's impossible to have organic, opinionated, meaningful discussion with that many people, as opposed to just considering people's opinions into the experimentation program. We've just built a really simple process, like a form where people can submit their ideas. They have to put their why they want to test it and whatever, but it's still a super easy shareable resource. Just like somebody comes to you with an email, hey, I want to test this, like, okay, put it in the pipeline. We'll prioritize it and we'll see where it lands. But your opinion is valid and heard, you know?
So walk me through a scenario where at Koalatative, y'all are working with a company that, and you haven't fired them. You haven't passed the 30-day mark to be like, this isn't a good fit. And you have a test idea. It's collectively agreed on from the squad of 13 that this is a test idea worth doing. So now you have the designer that's like, this isn't the proper design, and they're giving some random designs. And then perhaps the product owner is like, yeah, but I don't like this. This needs to be done this way because of this best practice list that someone named Shmuel Shpatel gave and said, this is the way we have to follow. And then the brand team's like, this is definitely not on brand. We have to do something else here. And then engineering team's like, we can't test this. How would you navigate this conversations where you have multiple stakeholders who are all kind of like bickering about little different things? How would you politic through that?
I would say upfront and honestly, like, that this is not gonna, get us anywhere. And we always advocate for having that champion from the client side who has the authority to make the final call. We sort of put that final decision on that person, and they should actually take on that politicking between those 13 stakeholders, let's say. Like, we will make the recommendations on our side of like, this is the best path forward. We need to consider these things for this test. These things don't matter as much. These are just, cosmetic changes. Like, it's also up to the client, like, what do you want to see there? But like, this is the core of the test that we need to do. The champion internally should have that final say, yes or no.
I'm going to counter with it depends on my side. I do think it depends on what is your role as CRO and what is your responsibility and autonomy. So if you, as a CRO, are responsible and you could run any test you want and you are the final decider, you think about a RACI, right? You are the decider and the actioner for anything that you need to run on the testing perspective. And you get inputs from other people, but CRO's the decider, then you can always flex that muscle and be like, look, ultimately it's my decision. I'm going to run with this. But I do think on the flip side, you might be a CRO who reports into a product owner or into marketing or something. And it's marketing's ultimate, or maybe you're a floating resource across a bunch of teams. And you, just like you said, you offer the recommendations, whether it's in-house or agency. You're the person who offers a recommendation. But as hard as it is, and this is hard as fuck for me, you are the recommender. You are the strategist. You are not the decider. It can be so hard to take yourself away from like, this is the best way to do it. I know it in my gut. Here's the data. You need to follow this. And if the product owner's like, I've taken all your inputs, I'm not doing it. Ultimately, because you're not responsible for maybe certain things that product owner is, you have to let it go and like, I've offered my strategy and you're going to do what you will from there. And then if it fails gloriously, you laugh in the background while you're like, told you so. Not really. That'd be bad politicking. I do think that's pretty apt that like at some times you're offering recommendations. You're not deciding. And that's important to know kind of where you fit in the hierarchy, right?
I think the reality is that you can never create that experimentation culture from outside in or bottom up if there isn't that collective sort of understanding of what the value even is to do those things, or at least interest in finding out what those things may bring the company. You're going to be in a world of hurt, I guess, but
a disappointment probably.
But it's like it's part of the job, and it's part of any job. You're going to deal with disappointments and challenges, and again, just have that healthy level of emotional detachment from specific outcomes. Like, it is what it is.
I hate that you're right. I think you are right though, that level of emotional detachment that like, as CROs, as someone who literally has a podcast on experimentation, incredibly passionate about testing all the things. So it could be super frustrating when maybe you've done all the research, you have such an easy test that you could execute, you have a ton of data behind it, takes 2 seconds to build, you could WYSIWYG if you really wanted to, and then some product owner's like, we're not doing this. And then as you can, your politics may only take you so far, and that's just never going to happen. I think you're right. You have to just like order DoorDash and be like, that's just how I'm going to enjoy the rest of this day.
Yeah, and even like the stuff you're talking about, even that is next level. Like if you're building a program from the beginning and you go in and you need to educate people why or how to implement the testing tool or why you need access to certain resources, like that can take a lot of time and convincing in politics as well.
Yeah.
So you're like still so far removed from even like being able to launch a test. So that's its own kind of thing. So there are definitely lots of challenges, and the politics is important because it does come down to relationships.
Fantastic parting words. Gerda, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Anything you want to plug? Any cool things happening over at Koalatative?
Yeah, we're trying to up our content game this year, launching a bunch of new good resources for free, like templates to manage experimentation programs and stuff. So you can just sign up for notifications on the koalatative.com website if you're interested in any CRO content that hopefully isn't super boring and complicated to understand as well. I think we kind of share that passion with you, at least to trying to explain these complicated concepts in a simple way to people who are, on that medium level rather than, joining the bookings and whatever companies in the world. So
Totally. Perfect. Well, excited to check that out. We'll definitely be subscribed. Thank you so much for joining us. And I'm just going to end it here. This is how we end it.
Thank you.